scarcity starts falling as a method of controlling humans. If everyone has a little home energy thing that provides them with all the energy for their house at virtually no charge, and the same thing is true of the ability to create whatever food you want just by pushing a few buttons. And then it extends even further because, of course, with replicators, you could replicate and build things at an incredibly low cost. The idea of the energy being too cheap to meter, which was first discussed by Buckminster Fuller in some of his writings, and the potential influenced all our great science fiction writers like Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke and so on. They all dealt with some of these subjects peripherally. And some of their projections are probably very close to what would happen. And that is the sense that if we all had this free energy, we would all instantly be able to do the float around spaceship kind of thing, in which case we don't need roads anymore. We don't even have to harvest oil out of the planet to build asphalt.
Wow.
And you'd be able to say, well, I want to go and live on top of that hill over there, and it doesn't matter that there isn't a power or phone or any of that because I just take it with me. And so you see how it opens up the whole planet. There's no longer any need really for nation states. Why pay taxes to anybody when you've got everything you need? You needn't interact with them if you decide not to. And in fact, under those circumstances, we may find that currency per se as a concept falls away, and I'm talking in the far distant future.
Sure.
And I would bet you under those circumstances, the thing that had any real value was the output of the human mind, and that would be some expression of art. And so art would be the actual, if you will, currency of the planet, because everything else would be too cheap to even mess with in terms of trying to place a value on it. Yeah, and we'll probably make all kinds of mistakes, and somebody might have obsessive compulsive disease and make 55 million, milk containers or something, and we'd have to deal with a few of these issues as we become uncrazy and start becoming sane. But that'll be part of the process.
It sounds very much like Star Trek.
It does, and see, it all happens from that first acknowledgement somewhere in the line that, yes, contact is real, it's happening now, it's happened in the past, and that's all that it takes. We don't even actually have to see their technology. We'll invent it ourselves just knowing it exists. And in fact, the military has done some interesting studies that way, where this was part of something in World War II, and I can't get into the technology. I don't know if it's classified or not, but it's kind of immaterial. But basically, they had two groups of scientists, and they were performing an experiment. They showed each group there were two groups. Each group had three people covering three different disciplines. They were both shown sets of movies. In one set of movies, they were shown a 15-minute film of two guys experimenting with a technology, and the technology works. Let's just say for the moment that they were trying to make invisibility. And they showed these guys suddenly putting on a cloak and becoming invisible. And it was done through a movie trick that was very sophisticated for the time. And in the other movie, they weren't successful, or they were partially successful. And then they let these scientists go at it. And the ones who had been shown a successful film created a successful product, and the others did not. And that was basically a test not of whether they could design these products, but rather what role the belief system played in the outcome of engineering systems, right?
Now, have you been following Ed Grimsley and his sidekick Bob Oliver and the wars in space that they can watch on these, super expensive night vision binoculars?
Yes, I'm aware of those. I was just, I'd love to be able to get a set and have a look, but of course we have so few clear days here, I wouldn't be able to see anything.
Well, you can come down and visit me this weekend, because Bob and Ed here on the Monterey Bay are going to have a sky watch.
Oh.
And let me just give out their telephone number. So if anybody lives in California and can drive over to Monterey Bay, I think I'm going to join them. It's 831-383-2676. 831-383-2676. And believe me, you can't afford to buy these binoculars. They're like $7,000. Maybe they're only $4,000, but...
Well, there's not much difference between those two as far as I'm concerned. They're both on the other side of don't exist in my wallet. So, but you brought up an interesting issue there, though, is our alien wars is not restricted to NASA or whatever. We don't know how it's going to mature and peak in 2011, and it might well be an issue of all of us sitting down here watching, a group of aliens battle it out up there. We just have no way of knowing how the details are going to come. But what we do know is that the emotional levels around that are building very steadily. And so I'm very confident that by 2011 we're going to see some serious breakthroughs into this relative to human consciousness.
Well, I have to admit the things that you have said that we're seeing. We just absolutely leaped over swine flu and vaccination.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
So what did you see? What did you see there?
Well, in essence, the language around the swine flu stuff is very disturbing because it seems to suggest that this was a deliberately released attack on humans. And that's all I'm saying is the language would say we're drawing the conclusion from the language that was the case. It also follows the pattern of the exposure of humans in 1918 to the pandemic that everybody would call the Spanish flu. And that one killed at least 50 million and maybe as much as 150 million humans on the planet. So we're in for a really tough time. There's absolutely no question about that. And also, the vaccines don't seem good. None of the language around the vaccines is in any way encouraging whatsoever. Both vaccines in general as being an effective method of reducing infection, pain, disease, or whatever in the general populace, as well as this particular batch of chemicals and their dual shot nature, and then all the other language around the supposed tests.
I just got an email from someone who was listening to our alien, and I didn't get it in time. But he's wondering if Obama, being an alien, being not a natural-born citizen, a.k.a. an alien, could that be the alien that you're picking up?
No, because we don't identify an alien. Here's how our categories work. There's humans, there's extraterrestrial humans, and then there's aliens. Aliens are not human DNA. And the alien, for instance, could come from Earth. It just wouldn't be it would be an intelligent being that is not a human DNA. But more likely it's going to be coming from space. And so we don't use the term alien referencing a non-documented person in any particular country because we look at things from the viewpoint of the global populace, and then our single largest subset under that is the American populace.
Okay. Now, I just wanted to throw in that my husband, who was that CIA operative that flew Bush back from the Paris meetings for the October surprise, he was a member of the Space Command, and I have finally found one other man that was a member of the Space Command. And the other man was actually out there in our ships, our spaceships, literally fighting aliens. My husband never told me about fighting aliens, but he did fly his boss, who at the time was the director of covert operations for the CIA. He did fly him to the moon base on the dark side of the moon. And when he told me he'd gone to the moon, of course, yeah, sure, I believed it. But the one thing he said is, haven't you ever wondered why we never went back to the moon? And I said, yes, I have wondered. And he says, the aliens told us not to.
Yeah, and I buy that as well. Yeah, there's a lot to suggest, especially in the NASA language. Language is very revealing, and when people stray outside normal bounds, it's like my ears just go boing, little radars or whatever, and or not so little radars. Anyway, some of the language used from 69 onward relative to the moon was very revealing. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, and Santa Claus code word being mothership. So they encountered other beings up there. I'm of the opinion that Jay Widener is correct with the moon landing, at least part of it being Spielberg, or not Spielberg, what's
Clark. No, Kubrick.
Yes, a concoction. And right. So that would tend to invalidate.
But I saw that, and it appears, let's just say that I saw the video that was supposedly put together that absolutely proved that it was a concoction. But that video was made of clips of people who were talking about something entirely different.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about a recent article that came out by Widener relative to how Kubrick did the backdrops and all of this and examined it from a technical viewpoint, and he explained in a different fashion. In essence, he's putting forth a theory that would have some of Hoagland's moon structures not be moon structures, but actually be an artifact of the fakery involved. Now, he's not saying that all of the photos were fakes. He's also not saying that we didn't go to the moon. He's just saying that there, for whatever reason, some of the stuff that was passed off as official moon photos were in fact created in a stage here by Kubrick on behalf of NASA, and here's how it was done. And I find his article and his reasoning very credible. Now, that, while it tends to invalidate some of Hoagland's stuff, doesn't invalidate some of Hoagland's conclusions, because some of his other conclusions are quite accurate. Some of the photos he's got do indeed show moonscapes that are not part of this Kubrick concoction. And so we're getting back to this whole idea of the aliens and so forth. Our data would suggest that as we get into 2011, a lot of this will become a lot clearer to us, because we'll be dealing with at least some level of generally accepted contact paradigm shift. And that is that our data would seem to suggest that the vast majority of humans that are going to be participating in the social order in 2011 across the planet will be aware of and acknowledge continuous contact with non-terrestrial beings, whether they're strictly speaking aliens, and that is to say non-humans, is another issue, because our language also gets a bit clouded at that level as we get down towards the detail. But we're nowhere near the peak of the language showing up. We might get to the point where if there is any organized media left and functioning between 2010 and into 2011, it may be that that's all they talk about for months, is the new secrets revealed coming out about this and the current thing that the visitors are doing and all of that kind of stuff.
Wow.
It's going to be fun. Yeah, it'll be very interesting.
So when do you see the swine flu really taking hold?
This actually probably September 15th in the U.S., or rather the developed northern hemisphere, which will be centered in U.S., U.K., and probably to some extent the lower Scandinavian countries, maybe into Germany, maybe a little bit into Holland, that kind of thing. There's this sort of linguistically described arc or scythe shape as to where the flu really takes off. But there's other issues there. This is the language that's showing up around it. So we may be running into the first of what we call the refuseniks. And that is to say that the governments are going to be running into a wall of people that absolutely refuse to have anything to do with this vaccine at any level of risk from, supposed government retribution. Now, we know that our government anyway, is preparing for this, because a recent conference on the swine flu in Washington, D.C. included topics such as what to do when the populace doesn't follow government orders.
Right.
So they're preparing. They're going to be the government's going to be rather shocked, I think, about the level of vehemence and refusal and the expression of it throughout a very large percentage of the population that they had not anticipated. I think they're really only figuring to get resistance from maybe 10 to 12 to 15% of the populace, and it may scale way up into the 50s or 60s or higher. It may be that there's only a small percentage of people willing to be sacrificial and actually take the vaccines. That's not to say that governments such as Greece, with their announced policy of no exceptions, everybody's going to get it, won't in fact try and do that. It's just to say here in the U.S., the refuseniks movement builds and eventually goes into to form a core around which if you will, a modern revolutionary or reform movement comes out.
Oh, can you talk about that a little bit? Because, all of us, we are just, we're trying to decide. Do we head for the hills? Do we carry our guns with us at all times? Do we shoot the guys with the needles that are coming after us?
But see, I don't see that happening. All that is fear language.
Okay.
You have to acknowledge whenever we get this kind of stuff, because I'm a trained analyst and a programmer and a software guy, I like to validate. And because I'm an Aikidoist, a martial artist, in Aikido what we do is we test constantly.
Okay.
And so you test yourself in, being able to project this energy or do that move and so on. And so I test our data sets against the developing reality. And so we see all the fear language out there that says, flee, they're going to shoot you in the back if you turn and run from the guy with a needle. Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of bogus. That is not going to happen here in the U.S. or probably anywhere else. The reason it's not going to happen here